And I think people should lean into the people behind these paywalls, the personalities that are driving opinion, and the ones who are doing well on Substack. They're going to thrive in this environment. People will crave that human intelligence and that human opinion. So I would, technocratically see the platforms as an opportunity and lean into my human side.
Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building how the business of news will look in the future. This week, I'm excited to welcome Mark Riley. Mark is the former Senior VP of Innovation at Dow Jones, which of course is the publisher of the Wall Street Journal. It's a job he held for 6 years before founding his own AI media consultancy, Matheson AI. So he's been skating to where the puck is going in terms of applying AI to media for a good long while before ChatGPT came on the scene. Of course, AI's here now in a big way, and it's forced the media industry to not just confront it, but to figure out where the best opportunities are in using it. And one of those is local news. It's no secret that over the last 20 years, local news has really suffered all over the world. But with AI, you can now theoretically create content, specifically newsletters, about what's happening in pretty much any town or any municipality at very little cost. So there's several companies who are working on this exact solution to what are often called news deserts, and Mark's is one of those companies. Matheson offers a tool called Hannah, which can create custom newsletters via AI with a fraction of the effort it would have taken a human to do. So Mark and I talk about that and broadly the promise of solving important media problems like the local news issue. But we also don't forget about the perils, notably avoiding AI slop and making sure Silicon Valley doesn't make all the rules in this next phase of tech intersecting with media. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and if you do, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a colleague. And I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the Media Copilot newsletter if you haven't already. The link's in the show notes. By the way, I've also announced a second cohort for my AI training course for PR and media professionals. It's a 6-week course filled with lots of hands-on live instruction for using AI tools to automate workflows, craft campaigns, and really just work smarter. You can learn more and sign up for the course at mediacopilot.ai. Okay, here's my conversation with Mark Riley, founder of Matheson AI. Mark, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Hi, Pete. Great to be here. A real pleasure. Thanks for inviting me along.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for coming. So, yeah, I'm thrilled to talk to you and hear all your perspectives on AI and media. I know you're sort of deep into it with a lot of your work currently, but I want to sort of get a little bit of background on you, particularly for my listeners who might not know about you and your company, Matheson AI. And I'm fascinated that you were at Dow Jones and you were the head of innovation there. So you've been like for years, you've been like skating to where the puck is going, like where tech and media meet, right? And then you left to found your own company. So tell me about, how you sort of got into, this position of being not just sort of in the media, but sort of looking at the future of it and really trying to adapt.
Sure. So, yeah, it's great to talk to you because we're both swimming in very similar waters here in terms of the overlap of media and AI. And so short story is about 2016, I think. My boss at the time at Dow Jones, the CEO, Will Lewis, asked me to do an audit of AI at Dow Jones. So I kind of scurried around the building and found pockets of AI. And obviously, this is way before ChatGPT, and there's some fairly interesting use cases that bubble up. And that, over the period of the next 2 or 3 years, I probably met over 110 AI vendors, mostly in the Valley, and got a feel for what was going on and what was working, what was not likely to work. And then we started introducing AI at the Wall Street Journal. I think we're the very first to bring in intelligent paywalls and the like. So I got the bug early, and I was particularly excited by it. And then came back to the UK during COVID, and I'm now in Bristol. So I moved from Brooklyn to Bristol, set up my own consultancy, which very much aimed at helping media companies and publishers adopt AI ethically. And that's where I am now.
Nice. So it's interesting. You started with, well, I don't know if you started, but it was, the focus ended up being on the monetization side and sort of figuring out that, which seems like a great first stop. Like that's very practical, as opposed to like let's update all our newsroom operations without knowing if this is going to pay off. It feels like that might be a smart roadmap in terms of like where to start deploying AI, which is kind of like where I would like to ask you really like when you sort of talk to media companies these days, where do you see the most immediate opportunities? Where are they going to get, do you think, the most bang for their buck when they start investing in AI? Like what is sort of the low hanging fruit on either the audience side or sort of the internal system side, do you
I mean, it's almost like saying where should they use electricity because it's kind of
think? True.
everywhere.
But
It's
you use
everywhere.
more in certain places, I suppose. But
Sure.
yeah,
I
we're going to
mean,
get to there.
yeah, I would bucket it into the business side, which goes back to all the classical AI use cases that we were looking at, and it's very efficient at driving subscriptions, churn reduction, advertising maximization, and then obviously post GPT with generative AI, the focus is now very much on the newsroom.
Hmm.
We've seen a lot of people adopt tools by osmosis. So there's people using a lot of tools very, very smartly across newsrooms. And now it's for the entire process of a story. If you look at the life cycle of a story from research through to compilation, through to content management systems, to publishing, to distribution, I mean, AI touches every part of that process now. But what I think should be table stakes for any media company now, they should be having some kind of AI for internal archive retrieval or search.
Okay.
Certainly, number one as a tool for your own teams and journalists to use to make connections between stories. But the more adventurous already putting that capability in front of their own audience. So for me, that would be a very obvious starting point.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many tiny tools. This is sort of where I come from, because as a journalist and sort of working in newsrooms, and now I still do my newsletter, and I'm always, I'm a perfectionist, right? You're like, oh, I want to make sure I link to the right story, and I have the wording here right, and all this stuff. And I've gradually introduced more AI just in sort of a ad hoc way to that process, right? And I think about certain tools that would be very handy. I don't know if anyone's built this, but the whole idea of using that archive in an intelligent way. And so I go top to bottom of my story, and then I could hit one button and it finds all the relevant links and spaces them out the right way to content I want to refer to, right? Because that honestly, if you just think about like linking stuff in a story, you think about efficiencies in some of these processes, that takes me a good like 15-20 minutes on any
Yeah.
sort of substantive story, just finding the right stuff I'm referring to. So, once you start deploying it in these sort of mini ways in a bunch of places, the gains can be, quite considerable when you look at them in aggregate. And I imagine you've looked at some of this and sort of quantified it, right? So, do you see can you say like a percentage, generally, even if it's a range of like you'll get so much time back if you use AI in these kind of ways, or how does that sort of conversation usually happen?
But it's funny what you were alluding to just then. I think the closest we've seen, and full disclosure, I haven't been on it yet, but deep research that OpenAI released last weekend, it the ambition behind that is to have some kind of research tool that would join all your knowledge together in
Mm,
a very informed kind of way. And they're saying this is the value of three researchers working for a week on my behalf can now be done in 20, 30 minutes. So those are the sort of time savings we're looking at. But on the shop floor, I mean, summarization tools saving
yeah.
you, transcription tools would be saving you hours. And then publishing tools, distribution tools, the same. I think the efficiencies are huge. Then the question, of course, what do you do with that spare time? And
Hmm.
hopefully, everyone will do more with less.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully, yeah, it doesn't necessarily lead to downsizing, although everyone fears that. And I guess I would ask you, in terms of that fear, that skepticism that I find, and I'm sure you do in a lot of newsrooms that are sort of just starting on this journey to integrating AI. Do you have sort of a go-to playbook or just things you say or show that somewhat quell that skepticism, or show the opportunity that is more present? Because obviously journalists are, obviously they're concerned about their jobs, but they're also concerned about accuracy, right? There's hallucinations that happen, and depends on how you implement the tools, of course, but there are legit concerns. And how do we balance that versus, like, this is sort of an inevitability, which sort of everyone sort of seems to acknowledge?
Well, I'd refer them back to your excellent podcast 2 weeks ago when you talked to Francesco Marconi. It's actually an
Mm,
ex-colleague of mine, and he made a very good point there. There's kind of a bifurcation between AI for data journalism, and data computation. AI, in my mind, the definition of AI is it kind of sees things that we can't see. So if you can train AI to go through piles of spreadsheets or look at company data, it's going to surface stories that humans would never see without teams and teams of people. So
mhm,
what Francesco is saying is you split that out from the humanist side, and the human side of journalism, which is human interaction and reporting and live reporting, and getting over the sentiment of the atmosphere of an occasion, that's still gold plated, right? That's untouchable.
mm.
So I think journalists should see they should not be afraid of it. It's a tool that's going to make them more efficient. But maybe the topic we should come on to later, but I think we should move away from the efficiency discussion, and newsrooms and businesses should be thinking about new products and new revenue lines. That's where it gets much more exciting for me.
Yeah, so that's sort of the business side, or also, like, which kind of includes the audience experience side of this, which fascinates me no end, because of the, like, everyone sort of defaults to chat. Even I do sometimes, about what the chat with your for an audience to interact with your content, but it's so much more than that, right? There's so many, like, different things you can do with AI. There's reversioning, which we're starting to see. Notebook LM has opened up a lot of people's imaginations to what you can do with content. You could take it, turn it into a podcast, or and why not other things, right? So cut through the hype of all this, right? Because everyone's like, oh, everything's over now. Now it's like, you don't need editors, you don't need that, blah 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 blah. Well, that's obviously not true. How can a media company, like, think about, okay, where is the best opportunities here? You might have a paywall, you might not, you might be interested in these other platforms. I mean, being able to just reversion things to other platforms still doesn't solve the problem. Where should you focus, right? So, how do you think about that?
I'd be interested if you agree with me, but I think the kind of holy grail for AI and media, which in my mind is distributing knowledge in real time,
Hmm.
is personalization, and I think it's a huge opportunity for companies to be able to expand their audience by repurposing information in formats that are much more um, relevant to particular audiences. So, in my mind, what we're doing, what AI can do very, very well, is it can take multiple sources of ingest, whether that's video or spreadsheets or podcasts or written word, puts them into the LLM, and then you can redistribute that knowledge in a format that's not just in the right frame for the new audience, but also in the right platform. So, for you could take a spreadsheet and turn it into a TikTok video, for example,
Hmm.
as an extreme example. And I think there was a podcast with Dylan Jacques from the Telegraph saying they translated a lot of their Ukraine content into Ukrainian and Russian and found a new audience that way. So I think media businesses should be thinking very ambitiously about how they can repurpose their existing content and make it much more relevant to very different audiences.
Right. And the thing is, what I'm gonna, this is gonna sound like a fear mongering thing, but it's true, which is that if they don't, someone will, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing with regard to a lot of the issues around copyright. And the training data thing is one of them. But I sometimes think about this in the context of the individual rather than the platform, right? So, where it's like, if I, as a user of the internet and AI, have, you can call it an agent, you can call it an assistant, but like something that is processing that content. And Notebook LM is a good example, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I could take any article I wanted, or set of articles around a topic, put them in that, and get my own podcast on it. Of course, is that going to be as good as the media vetted version? Probably not, because I know they're going to optimize for accuracy and various other things. But the thing is, if that's not there, there's going to be this layer, right? And some of the platforms have stepped up on this. So I kind of um, sometimes think that media companies might push off too much on that customer layer, and just expect that they're going to use a thing rather than offer it, because I think there's a little bit of, is it, I don't know, lack of confidence that they don't think of themselves as tech companies. A lot of them tried to be, and then they ended up being eaten by platforms in terms of the revenue opportunities. So there's this strange kind of moment where AI is promising this brave new world, and we all know we got screwed last time with social media and search. We don't want that to happen again, but at the same time, we also know we don't quite have the tech talent to keep up with these. Is that a false binary? Am I even thinking about it the right way? Because I do feel like tech companies need to step up and lean into AI, and not surrender to platforms. But it seems like there's a lot of moving parts here to balance. I don't know. I know that's a big jumble of things, but it is all about that interface layer between the knowledge and the audience, and like who's controlling the parts of it, right? Because there's big techs in there too, in addition to all the stuff in between.
So, just so the question is should we be fearful of this opportunity, this technology, or is this something they should be running
It's more
towards?
like when you think about offering your own audience experience. I could see a lot of media companies just thinking we should give up, because there's going to be like some perplexity that does it, or some user using a very popular tool like ChatGPT or whatever. So almost demoted media companies might almost just end up demoting themselves as these purveyors of just raw information, signing licensing deals and not worrying about their own
Okay, got
experience,
it.
right? That's kind of where I feel like the give up side might think things are going. But is that the future? What do you think?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche that armies always train for the previous war and they're never ready for the next one. I think it's a
Yeah.
mistake to think of this debate in the same terms as the debate with the search engines and the previous platforms. I mean, the value exchange there was very different, and there's come to a sort of an agreement that we'll take traffic in return for part of our content. And I think this discussion is radically different,
Hmm.
and it's less about negotiating away content because the traffic coming back is definitely not working in the same scenario. And then
Yeah.
media companies have to make the decision, well, how do we play with these platforms, these new AI platforms? We play nicely. Do we cut deals? Where do we get the value exchange there? But I would also, I mean, again, as I'm a natural optimist, and something of an accelerationist, I would take that fear away and frame it as an opportunity. And
Hmm.
again, let these platforms do the grunt work, which is relevant to particularly new tools, which I think are really exciting. But there's going to be a human element here where you're good at this, right? The podcast plus newsletter business. It's all driven
Hmm.
by personality. And I think people should lean into the people behind these paywalls. So the personalities that are driving opinion, and the ones who are doing well on Substack, they're going to thrive in this environment. People will crave that human intelligence and that human opinion. So I would technocratically see the platforms as an opportunity and lean into my human side.
I will, in a self-serving way, agree with you, because but I think you're right. I think there is the human element that people will always crave, and I think how AI can serve as a discovery engine for that is still a little bit TBD, right? Because, like you said, there isn't like quite the referral traffic, and then there's these deals, yes, for licensing, but there's also this very nascent and emerging um, field of SEO for chatbots, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
how do you sort of end up in one of these summaries, and why would you even want to if you don't have a deal? All of that just feels like it's a little fragmented. It looks like, in terms of the future, like, because not all of these. chatbots even have the same stuff, right?
Sure.
You're looking at like, New York Times has obviously opted out of being in Chat GPT, and if that ends up being how people discover things going forward, at least from an AI stance, um, that could be uh, that could be an issue. And I mean, not just specifically for the Times, but like just not having this sort of completeness that we're used to in the Google open web world.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to shift gears a bit, ask you about specifically some of these formats. Like you mentioned newsletters, and it is one of these things that I think is often cited and used with AI because newsletters do tend to follow a template, right? And they do tend to have um, traditionally been sort of summarized versions of some media content and things like that. A lot of people are applying this. I know you've got a product called Hannah, and you also have a great newsletter called Media Morph. You guys, yeah, you catch a lot of stories that I don't, and it's a source of inspiration for me. So, tell me about this product and how you use it to build your own newsletter and how others can use
Sure.
it.
I mean, just to back up a little bit, I think we all agree now newsletters are having a moment. I mean, they always have been having a moment, but it seems like if you listen to Sarah Ebner from the FT, she's saying that newsletters are now attracting the best editors and the best teams. Newsletters are serving so many different functions, whether it's driving traffic to stories, driving subscriptions as an ad platform themselves. So that's kind of where I see the kind of landscape. But this came out of a project I did about 2 years ago now with my colleague Ed Daniels, and we were trying to crack the problem of the broken business model for hyperlocal news. So, as I say, I now live
Mm,
in Bristol, in the UK, which is a very vibrant, 500,000 people city, and we wanted to build a tool that just collated information from lots of sources, so news and blogs, universities, whatever we could find, and collate it into a nice format where we could then distribute it as a hyperlocal newsletter. So that was the challenge we set ourselves. And we built this tool called Hannah, Hana, and it worked, right? And it was very good at ranking on relevancy, but also we made sure that it was very recent. So what I call recency. So you can train it to just go
mhm.
back 2 days or 5 days or a week or a month. And then, what would have taken us a morning to compile a nice newsletter with 20 stories could take us now half an hour. And then we had the kind of, well, this works in Bristol. It's going to work anywhere, frankly. So it'll work in any city and then it'll work on any topic. So we've kind of morphed into not just a B2C product, but I think it's very good for B2B research. And it works very well on topics like AI media, which then generates my newsletter that goes out on a Tuesday
Mhm.
called Media Morph. So that's kind of the journey. But, you know, along the way, the key lesson we learned was a human in the loop to
Yeah.
check the output. That's our golden rule. And then give it personality again. So all our newsletters are topped with human editorial. Um,
Mhm.
we check the content, and then the other lesson we've learned is around the UI. So the UI still has to be perfect. There's no getting around that. And then the last thing we've learned is attribution. So we are very, very religious about all our stories are credited and attribute back to the source. And there are summaries. We see those as snippets, as kind of adverts for the source material. We drive traffic back to there. So that's where Hannah is, and we're quite ambitious about building our own stable of newsletters, but also offering Hannah as a platform for other people who want to build internal newsletters or external newsletters.
Yeah, I feel like this is obviously an area of great interest with a lot of folks. So there's definitely a couple of companies in the US, probably more than a couple, that are doing some interesting things. I mean, Patch has always been interested in local, and there's this new company called Good Daily that I'm sure you've read about, and they're using AI in an ambitious way to solve it. I'm not, there's been reporting on this on like whether the quality is there with all of them, et cetera. I think all of that, I'm not here judging it all, but I'm just sort of as an Uber trend, it seems like AI solving what you might call the local media problem. Um, it seems like just a huge area of focus right now, because it seems like that, like famously, there's been this retreat from local media because of like it's seemingly the lack of opportunity. You just couldn't give the amount of attention given the human cost to sort of cover all these places with the right amount of return. In other words, there's no the ROI didn't make sense in media for a long time, and now it seems like with AI, it's like oh, it looks like it could make sense, and because as again to your point, if you have the right process, and I like that you mentioned UI, which I think is tremendously important as again someone who's worked in a lot of newsrooms. Um, you can sort of end up being in the place where one person can sort of do the work to support several different localities, which is kind of like you have to sort of cross a certain equation, a balance there to make it worth it. And that just it just seems like it's something AI was born to do. And if AI can sort of solve this problem, so to speak, maybe that is sort of the the catalyst to sort of remove a little bit of this speculation around the technology. I don't know. What do you think in terms of like this
Yeah,
trend? Is this the first could potentially the first victory of AI in the media world, and that it sort of gives a resurgence to local news?
yeah, with caveats, right? I don't
Right.
think it would be popular just to scrape all the local current struggling local news outlets and just repackage that as your own using AI. I think that's a dangerous trap to fall into. But a good use case, right? So Matheson has built a tool for another client called it transcribes the entirety of the EU Parliament and committee meetings and the UK Parliament, which was previously humans would have to sit through 3 hour committee meetings, right? Now we can transcribe all of that in real time. So apply that to the local level. Instead of having a junior journalist sit through court cases or council meetings,
Hmm.
AI can listen in. It can understand what's relevant or interesting to an audience, transcribe it, summarize it, and you've got a much more efficient way of reinstating some form of hyper local reporting. And there are tools out there already started watching rugby, football, sorry, soccer matches, learning, what's going on in the game and writing a brief summary of the game. So I'm not saying we're there yet, but the broken business model of local news and journalism, I think, is solvable in the next year or
Mm,
two.
right. And I don't want anyone to think we're being too optimistic, so I'm going to have to double click on maybe one of the caveats. And so one of the dangers of having AI do too much work in one of these things is what some people call AI slop, right? That it's kind of like just this repurposed, low quality content. And again, I've recently written about this, like what exactly is slop and what exactly is just AI assisted writing. I think there's nuances there, but it's also kind of a fine line. And um, I guess I would ask you like a little bit about, I don't think anyone wants AI slop who wants to build anything sustainable. But it's a problem because some people just are building these sites and they're just getting SEO clicks and whatever. And so slop is sort of a part of the internet that needs to be guarded against. And how do you think about in creating content like this, trying to sort of figure out where how to the line like staying clear of that line, I guess,
Yeah.
so that you're not filtered out at any point, even by the reader, right? Like even if you make it past whatever else, like you want something that is worthwhile that they hopefully don't even think is AI. Because obviously if it's an AI generated, they're even if it's high quality, there's sort of a change. I mean, not that I'm endorsing not being transparent, but you know what I mean. It's got to be valuable to the point where they might know it's AI, but it's good. A lot of nuances there, a lot of things to think about, but the whole point is like guarding against the low quality stuff. How do you think about the problem of slop in the internet broadly, and how should someone who is thinking about sort of tiptoeing into this idea of using AI to help with content avoid it?
Yeah, well, your piece made a good point that there's grades of slop, right? I mean, there's slop, and then there's slightly less sloppy slop, and we probably need a word, we probably need a word for
It's
that.
a
But
smoothie.
it's a smoothie. So, I mean, again, our golden rule is we see what AI generates as a first pass. And the real value
Hmm.
for me in the AI tool we've built is more the retrieval, right? So it's
Yeah.
just smart at knowing the relevant and recent pieces to look at. So it'll come back with 12
Hmm.
suggestions. We'll edit it down to 8 and then rewrite it in our own voice and check and fact check at that point. So I think it saved us a bunch of time, but the output is still readable in our voice and fact check. But yeah, there's always going to be the other end of the slop spectrum. People are just
Hmm.
pumping out quantity over quality, and I come back to my slightly optimistic point earlier that does present opportunities um, for fact checked subscriber news that's written by quality researchers and journalists to rise above the slop. So, you know,
Hmm.
I think people will pay to avoid the slop, which presents an opportunity. I hope.
Nice. So I talked a little bit about the audience reaction to AI, but I also am interested in how does AI change the relationship between an audience and a publication, whether it's a newsletter or a website or whatever. Um, there's all these chatbots, I think, that sort of give this new dimension of an interaction. So if you are offering chat on your site, you get sort of a whole different group set of sort of insights from these people who are actually interacting with you, which I find interesting. But to your point about personalization, where do you kind of see that going? Like, there's been some people talked about. I know Francesco, our friend, he has sometimes speculated. Well, you could have theoretically different versions of the same story for different people, depending on where they are, what their history is, what their interests are, right? Which is a fascinating idea, though it also kind of turns into this thing of like the news gets a little gray, then doesn't it? Once you sort of have different versions of it, but it is kind of like what we're already doing, isn't it? Like even if you have an article on we read the same article in the Times, you're always bringing your own context. It's probably not the only article you're reading on that, and you're coming to different conclusions regardless. So, um, can that happen at the media company level or the website level? I mean, why not? What do you think?
Yeah, well, Facebook advertising has been doing this very well for a long time, right? There's millions of versions of ads going out, especially targeted, so it touches your button. So, can news do that? Maybe. I think that it's all about urgency, right? In terms of today's news, people with limited time, narrow bandwidth, they want punchy, summarized. This is important to me news, especially in the business context. I think people will pay for that. However, there's always the danger, to use the food analogy, that stuff being pumped out by AI summarized search engines is essentially kind of ultra processed food, and that can't be
Hmm.
your diet
Yeah.
for life. And then you need some nutrition, and you'll need to come back to the source material. You need your steak and veggies, and then that's always been the way. And I think again, people will pay for that. But it's well, the way I see it. Going back to the deep research tool that came out 2 weekends ago, I mean that
Hmm.
the amount of information that people can get now, if you layer that onto the news environment, what I would love is to reading a piece about Syria and you want to do a deeper dive on a personality or a piece of politics. At the moment, you have to leave that browser, go into a search engine, and do your own research. I would love
Right.
it if a news organization allowed me to do my deep research within their environment, and I come away, started with my fries and ended up with my salmon. So,
Hmm.
my
Something low fat. I got you.
analogy's fallen over,
Yeah.
but yeah, I wish people would think about that opportunity.
Nice. Smart. Um, so copyright is obviously a big deal with regard to content that every media company sort of thinks about, and the idea of like, okay, how to what extent should I lock down what I'm doing, and what do I do if I can't get OpenAI on the phone, and to make a deal. Um, it seems like there's been a recent sort of tide shift. Well, I'm talking specifically about a case that happened recently with Reuters, and it was one of the first cases in the U.S. that ruled that the training of an AI with someone's content isn't necessarily fair use. Um, so given that, do you think that AI companies might be a little more circumspect about sort of this total harvesting of stuff? Because I do feel like whatever company you are, yes, you can do some protections around crawlers, but I don't think that it can, if it's out there, it's out there, to a large extent. Um, but does this ruling offer some hope that anyone trying to do something with that in a commercial sense will think twice about it? And in that case, like what is the answer in terms of like your business model and how you should think about monetizing that in an AI environment?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big question, I know, but I just kind of want to get your take on the whole, like, if you're not a huge media company, like what do you do uh, as uh, this this area of business rapidly evolves?
So,
Yeah.
I mean, just a bit of nuance. I'm sure you
Yeah.
understand this, and I think most people understand this now. But the use of content, there's two buckets, right? There's training data, which is running out, but that's obviously high quality human written training data, which the models are desperately hungry for, and that arrangement is what people are signing these deals with OpenAI, and they like to go into their archives and use that as training data as one conversation. They've figured out some kind of value they're attaching to that. It's beyond me, but they are inking these deals, and there are companies like Human Native that will allow you to construct those deals in a very efficient, elegant way. And monetize your archive, right? So that's one thing. I think that's less complicated. The more complicated
Mhm.
bucket is the what you call it, inference or RAG or
Right.
search, which is today's news being pumped out by a AI search engine without any attributional credit. And that, in my mind, is great to say the least. And it's fair game probably if it's news from a public broadcaster and it's in the public domain. But if it's paywall content and it's had a robot text saying "Do not touch," no
Yeah.
trespass is allowed, and you've gone behind that paywall and you scraped it and cached it, then you're asking for trouble, I think.
Mhm.
But there are these startups that are coming around to try and solve that problem by creating some kind of monetary value flow between the end user and the creator. So, I hope the courts will sort this out. If not, the market will sort it out. But the media companies are definitely on their game this time round. Um,
Mm.
and it'll be a fascinating one to watch. I don't know. Where are you? I might love to hear your opinion on that one.
Well, I think, as the business models get figured out, um, I think there's always kind of been is this tension between optimize for humans or optimize for Google, and now it's going to sort of become optimized for humans or Google or bots, the summarize engines and Google, and then it's also, that those are kind of related. But I also feel like as more and more people use these summarization engines, that part becomes even more important. And I sort of fear the idea that for the process stuff, for some of the, at least some content, there's going to be not as much stake anymore because a lot of the stuff will be optimized for that sort of bot consumption. Um, because I used to be able to credibly say to newsrooms, right, when I would teach newsrooms all about SEO and why it's important, that at the end of every search is a human and they want information. And so as much as you do things in the process for Google, you want human eyeballs at the end of the day. I don't know if that's true in 5 years. Like in a sense, like I do think in 5 years, yes, you could want human eyeballs, but a significant chunk of the stuff that fuels your media company and the monetization will be a summarization bot thing that doesn't necessarily end up with humans on that content, right? So again, I don't quite know what that looks like, because obviously we've just been talking about steak and humans and how people still want that connection. That's true. It's never going to go to zero, or even something small, like, like that's always going to be a big chunk of it. But I also think there's this strange sort of bot side of the internet that can only get larger.
Well,
That's
here's a crazy scenario for you. That in the near future, I tell my agent I want to book a ticket to the Bahamas for a holiday, and then rather than me going to the travel section of the Times, my agent will just go roaming looking for content. That content's now going to be optimized for an agent to search for, and the agent
exactly.
will then go through and make the purchase on my behalf. But at no point has a human seen any content on that journey, which is
Hmm.
probably slightly tragic in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier with does the media company do that, or does the individual do that? And honestly, I think it's a handshake. Like I think the media company does some optimization for agents, given that there's probably some business model with the agent creator, or some layer in between, whether it's a toll bit or something. But it is optimized for that idea. They're like, oh, okay, these people are doing this and they're paying for it, so let's optimize for it. And then your agent, you just pick the best one for whatever you do and give it the right prompt, and boom. And then, like you say, you get this version of something that isn't the thing, and that allows you to go deeper, but for a good chunk of the time you probably won't. So yeah, again, it gets a little gray, but that's the beautiful thing about the future. You make a bet on where that puck's going, and you go for it. And it seems like you've been pretty successful at doing that so far. Um, all right. Like, what do you think? Given all this, I'll end on that optimistic. What's the optimistic view of what we were just talking about? Like, project out 5 years, 10 years. What does the
Well,
information ecosystem look like?
as soon as you go 5 years out, you've got to bring AGI into the conversation, right? And I
Yeah.
tell my clients now to build with a view to AGI, artificial general intelligence, and at that point, not only internally, how does that affect the business of media? If you've got the smartest person in the room is now an AGI that can make massively informed strategic decisions and tactical decisions about how to run a media company, that's one thing. But if the audience are then learning to engage with AGI, that will be the bar that they'll set for the information that they're wanting to get and pay for on a daily basis. And then how does that impact? And it comes back to the discussion around personalization and information and how's that tailored. So that's kind of the brave new world I think we're heading towards. I don't again. I don't want to sound like the AI is winning, the humans are over. I do think, and I can say it again, this is an opportunity for the human element to rise to the surface, and people will still pay for that. Will pay for more Substacks and more subscriptions because they want to see opinion written by a human. They want to hear a human voice from the Super Bowl, not a bot telling them what's going on. So I think there's going to be a yin and a yang. There'll be extraordinary amount of information, but the ultimate limiting factor will be the human bandwidth. Right? There's only so much information we can take in a
Mhm.
day. So, how do you make that window of information is super relevant, that they get what they
Mm.
want when they want in the format they want it? But yeah, it's exciting to me, and I think the pace of change, as this is just going to accelerate.
Oh
Um,
yes.
so watch this space. But yeah, I'm optimistic.
Awesome. Well, if people want to watch your space, where can they find you, Mark?
Mark Riley on LinkedIn or Matheson.ai. And Matheson, by the way, I'm not sure you know this, is Alan Turing's middle name. That's how I came
Oh, I
up with
didn't know that. That's amazing.
my name. So Matheson AI for the advisory work, but Hannah HANA.news is the product we're super proud of. We're wanting to see that get into more hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Folks should check that out. It is a very cool product. Mark, this has been great. Thanks so much for dropping by and chatting about AI with me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pete. Been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Mark Riley. If you like what you heard, please just take a minute to leave a rating and review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter and check out mediacopilot.ai for our classes on AI for journalists, PR professionals, and communicators. Be seeing you in the future.